Right, one of the problems with talking late on in the day is that by the time you get to stand up, most people have said most of what you're going to say. So this could be quite quick. However, what we've done here is put together some ideas that we brought from the aviation side. I'll give some background to where we're coming from. We actually have been working in the aviation sector now for some time, about 8 years. We're an IATA strategic partner, and we sit on, along with others, on the microbiological task force, which addressed these issues without the biofuel, but these issues some years ago. So what I'll try to bring in here is some of the results of that work, and add in a little bit for the marine diesel that we've identified already. I mean, as Aubrey said, things are changing faster than we can run. So what I'm putting up here won't be the answer that we come out with in 2 to 3 years' time. It will be different. But here, at least, I hope, is a starting point. It's been mentioned a number of times that removing the water is key to good husbandry. Now, that's becoming more difficult with biofuels, but the free water in the bottom of the tank is your main enemy. If you can get rid of that, you reduce the chances of catching a microbiological cold. It says here, utilize water bottom drainage systems if they exist. Now, the experience we've had, which I have to say is mostly in Australia and New Zealand so far, most vessels we've been talking about, 8 to 80 meters, don't have drainage systems, and they also have a number of tanks spread around the craft. So I know that that is a difficult one. But if you can remove it, then you will reduce the chances of contamination. Now, if you can't drain it, there have to be other physical methods, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Another good monitoring system is to alternate your fuel tanks. Again, somebody's going to put their hand up and say, I've only got one. I'm trying to make a kind of generic picture here. If you are at all unsure about a load of fuel, then put it somewhere where you know where it is. So if you identify that there is a problem, you can treat it, rather than mixing everything up into the same tank. And this seems to be becoming more important with biofuels, because there are stability and storage issues with biofuels that we don't seem to have with mineral-derived fuels. Clean your system out annually, including the filters, as a basic standard practice. On the fuel, test the fuel before uploading if you can. We've been working with some navies who seem, as a part of their ordinary practice when they're out, they will fill up every 2 to 3 days. So as they pass a port, they'll come in and top their tanks up. I mean, there's some ex-Navy guys here, so I'll be careful, but I believe they have to keep their tanks to about 85% full. Now, that is problematic if you're picking up fuel from places where, shall we say, the fuel system is less sophisticated than it would be in the UK. So if you can test it before you upload, that is a good idea. If you can't, then put it somewhere where you know where it is, it's on its own, and if you subsequently have a problem, you can treat it. I'm a test company producer, so I would say this, wouldn't I? However, we do say test at regular intervals. I think Joan Kelly said earlier on, we're not trying to frighten you here, but no matter how good your monitoring system is, you will not eradicate this problem. You will reduce the chances of getting the problem. So what we say is work out a suitable interval, not more than a year. If you're in one of the high-risk areas, then you want to bring it down to, say, quarterly. There's no point in testing more than, or shorter period than once a month, because they can't grow that quickly. If, as part of your monitoring regime, you do actually get a case of contamination, then you should look at reducing the interval, because the limits that we use, which come across from IATA, we don't use the Lloyd's register list. We have basically 3 states of fuel. Your fuel is either okay, we say negligible contamination because there's always something there, but it's not growing. You either then have moderate contamination and heavy contamination. Now, moderate contamination you normally can't see, and this is even before you bring in Aubrey's biofuels issues. What happens then is the consortium of organisms that come together, that have to come together to start growing, have done so and are growing, and they're at detectable limits. But at this stage, they're either growing slowly or they haven't been growing for long enough that they're not posing a risk to your operation or to your structure. If you get to the heavy level, then there's a whole new ballgame, and I'll come to that in a minute. The aim of testing is to do it at sufficient intervals that if you have caught a microbiological cold, you catch it at the moderate level, and that's what you should be thinking of if you decide to implement a testing regime. Going on to cleaning. In the aviation industry, it's quite simple. You're not allowed to use any of these additives. Everything is mandated in the aviation industry. We had to go through IATA, Boeing, Airbus, and everything else, and you have to go in the manuals. It's quite simple in fuel. Jet A is a particular specification. That's all you're allowed to use. You're not allowed to do anything with it. Now, you guys, I suppose, are luckier that you can actually do some other things. I'll mention two here. One is fuel conditioning. There are some products out there which remove the free water. Now, I'm not a chemist, but I'm not quite sure how they do it. But they take the free water out, and you can shake up a mixture of water and fuel to get it nice and cloudy, put this in, and it will make it clear. Some of them, as Joan said, are good, some are not so good, and some are little more than coloured water. You really do need to have a look at what they are. And this might be, if this grouping goes forward, that's the sort of information exchange that you can have. Try some of these fuel conditioners, see which ones actually do work, and then use them as part of your cleaning up regime. Fuel polishing, this is where we start to use physical equipments. I mentioned some types here: the centrifuges, magnets, UV lights, filters, and heat itself. Again, there are some good, bad, and indifferent ones here. We've been looking at one that's being made in New Zealand for that particular market, which uses a mixture of centrifuges, magnets, and UV lights. And it does seem to work. So there are ones out there that can actually clean your fuel. So if you do get a microbiological problem, you can treat the bugs, but then actually rescue your fuel rather than having to throw it away. I mentioned the three levels of negligible contamination, moderate contamination, and then heavy. Moderate, as I say, is when the consortium has got together and has started to grow. At this stage, you can't see it. And at this stage, there's minimal risk that it's actually doing any damage to your vessel. In those cases, apply a biocide. There are different biocides. There are some that move to the water. There are some that stay in the fuel. There are some that do both. Again, we're not subject matter experts on biocides, but I think it's becoming increasingly obvious to all that the microbial problem now is in both phases, and you need to look at that. Again, I would urge you to share your experiences by trying some of these chemicals, and try them for different circumstances. If you have your microbiological contamination in fuel that has no freestanding water, you will need a different one than if you're applying it to a tank where there's 4 or 5 inches of free water at the bottom of the tank. Assuming that you've found the moderate contamination because you've used a biological test, we suggest then that you retest after a week to confirm that the biocide has actually worked. Different levels apply to different industries. For instance, in the aviation industry, we would fill a tank up to 1/3 full, because 99 times out of 100, the microbiological contamination is on the floor of the tank because gravity rules. However, as you saw on a picture there of an in-wing pipe, sometimes it can stick to an upward-facing surface above that. on the assumption that the biocide does what it says on the tin and actually kills your bugs. If you get a subsequent positive test, it's normally because the contamination that you had was above the level of the fuel fill in the tank when you applied the biocide. Again, in the aviation industry, what they would do then is actually fill the tank right up to the top to try and get a complete coverage of the aircraft structure to kill all the bugs. And that's a pain, because then you can't use the aircraft with for any distance, or with a particularly full load of passengers. Heavy contamination, I say, this is what you're trying to avoid, because this is when it starts to get expensive. Once you've got heavy contamination, you've seen the pictures, and Ed's going to show you some more shortly of what it can look like. Your problem is blocked filters, which will stop the engine from running, fuel starvation. In the aviation industry, they have slightly different problems. They're more worried about corrosion, because the wing is the fuel tank, and if you eat through the wing, the whole thing falls off. So what you have to do there is drain it and clean it. And I know that's very problematic for the smaller craft who've got a number of tanks spread around the vessel. Most of the money that the Auckland incident incurred was because they physically had to go and cut upside the side of the tank off and physically get inside. They had a very highly paid young lady who was almost made out of rubber, who could actually get in there and do the cleaning. It's not a very nice job. We've always advised that you use high pressure hoses, and you physically then have to get in with some sort of cloth or other physical material to pull it out. As Aubrey says, these things love getting into the tight corners. And if you leave it there and apply a biocide with a lump, biocides are all contact killers. If you've got a ½ inch of microbial sludge there, that's many, many millions of bacteria all stacked up one on top of each other, some live, some dead. If the biocide can't get to them, it can't kill them. So if you then apply or upload with fuel after that, the bugs say, thank you very much, it's lunchtime, and off they go again. And within a few weeks, you've got another filter clogged. Again, we would say retest after a week to confirm that the biocide has worked. Testing. There are a number of tests available. The laboratory test is called IP385, Institute of Petroleum, I believe that is. It's the benchmark. It takes 15 days to get a full result and a full report. It will tell you as much as you want to know. In fact, we do them, and we will even tell you the names and the numbers of the individual bugs that are inhabiting your tank. Not that many people I've known are particularly interested in that. They just want to know, have I got it, and how badly. There are some what I've called traditional growth tests. It's not a scientific term. There are a number of dip slides available. Dip slides in general can only be used for testing water. In the aviation world, there's only one dip slide that passed the trialing system that the airlines put in place, and that is only approved for use in water. They are, shall we say, slightly problematic with fuel. They again take 5 to 7 days. You will see some really cheap ones available. You get what you pay for at the end of the day. There are Thixotropic Gels, which is something you need your spell checker to use, which basically are a glass jar with a gel in it, which will grow up the bugs that grow in fuel. These are far more reliable. They take 5 to 7 days to get a full analysis, although if you've got a heavy bacterial contamination, you can see them after 24 hours. These, the dip slides and Thixotropic gels require heating, or I've forgotten the word, incubating, sorry, thank you. I'm having a senior moment more and more as I get older. They require incubating and monitoring. Another, actually this should be a main heading, it's not a growth test. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's the thing that makes a glowworm glow, and all cells have one half of it, and they add the other half, and it will give you a number. You have to have a reader for it, but it will give you quick results, i.e. in minutes rather than hours. It detects all life, and as I say, it requires a reader. Then there are immunoassay tests. Actually, there is only one, and I make it, which is the one that we sell into the aviation world, and now we've designed one for diesel. Diesel's a far more complicated fluid than kerosene. For kerosene, we only actually had to track, when I say an immunoassay test, think pregnancy kit. That's exactly what it is. For aviation kerosene, we only had to detect one organism because the profile of bugs doesn't change over time. In diesel, it does, so we've had to develop a far more complicated system. Ours works in 10 minutes. Reports at the 2 IATA levels. Ours is not fully quantitative, whereas some of the other ones are. And it's easy to use. And Mr. Chairman, that was my little commercial break. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.